David woke up to the sound of a soft hum, like the purring of a massive machine. His eyes blinked open, adjusting to the strange light around him. The air smelled of something sweet, almost like honey mixed with flowers, but it wasn't anything he recognized. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, like he was submerged in deep water. His surroundings were surreal. The walls shimmered with an iridescent glow, shifting colors as if alive. Strange symbols floated in the air, pulsing softly before vanishing. He realized he was lying on a smooth platform made of some material he couldn't identify. The surface was cool, almost soothing, and it seemed to adjust to his weight as he shifted. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. A voice answered, startling him. It wasn't human. It was smooth, neutral, and slightly mechanical. "You are in the palace of Vithran on the planet Exetheria. Welcome, David Kane, Ambassador of Earth." David sat up quickly, his heart racing. Palace. Exetheria. Wait, how did I get here? I was on a ship. There was a conference. His memory was a blur, fragments of faces, a meeting, and then nothing. "You were chosen," the voice replied. "Your presence here is critical to the survival of your species." Before David could question further, the platform beneath him shifted, lifting him gently to his feet. He staggered slightly, still feeling weak, but the platform adjusted to support him. "Chosen for what?" he demanded. The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, a doorway appeared in the shimmering wall, and a figure entered. David froze. The being was tall, towering over him, with a presence that was both majestic and intimidating. Her skin was a deep, radiant blue, glowing faintly like the surface of the walls. She wore a flowing garment that seemed to ripple like water, and her eyes were piercing, bright silver with swirling patterns that seemed to look straight into his soul. "Ambassador Kane," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "I am Ashera, Queen of Tetheria." David swallowed hard. He had never seen anything like her. She was alien in every sense of the word, but there was a strange beauty to her, an elegance that was almost mesmerizing. "Your Majesty," he managed to say, his voice shaky. "Why am I here?" She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving him. "You are here because your world stands on the brink of annihilation. Your people seek allies among the stars, but alliances are not given freely. They are earned." David frowned. "Annihilation? What are you talking about? Earth isn't at war." Ashera tilted her head slightly, as if amused by his ignorance. "Not yet, but the storms of conflict are gathering, Ambassador. You are here to prove that your species is worthy of standing with us." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "How do I do that?" Her silver eyes narrowed slightly. "Through the ceremony of unity. A test that will bind our fates together. If you succeed, Earth will gain our protection and our technology. If you fail..." She let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken threat more chilling than any words. David's mind raced. He was no soldier or hero. He was a diplomat, trained to talk his way out of problems, not dive into alien rituals. "What does this ceremony involve?" Ashera's expression softened, though her gaze remained intense. "The details will be revealed in time. For now, know this. It is a test of spirit, will, and trust. It is not to be taken lightly." Before he could respond, the mechanical voice from earlier spoke again. "The ceremony begins at dawn, Cytherian time. Preparations must be made." Ashera nodded and turned to leave, her movements graceful yet commanding. "Rest now, David Kane. You will need your strength." "Wait," he called after her. "What if I refuse?" She paused, looking back at him with an almost sorrowful expression. "You cannot refuse. The choice was made when you were brought here." Without another word, she disappeared through the doorway, leaving him alone with his thoughts. David sank back onto the platform, his mind spinning. He didn't ask for this, didn't sign up to be humanity's savior. Yet here he was, on an alien world, about to take part in a ritual he didn't understand, with stakes that could determine the future of Earth. The platform beneath him shifted again, transforming into a bed-like shape. The lights dimmed, signaling it was time to rest, but sleep felt impossible. As he lay there, staring at the shimmering ceiling, one thought echoed in his mind. What have I gotten myself into? David barely slept. The shimmering ceiling above him seemed to pulse in rhythm with his own thoughts, refusing to let his mind settle. When he did drift off, his dreams were filled with fragmented images of Earth burning, alien worlds colliding, and Ashera's piercing silver eyes staring at him with a mix of expectation and sorrow. A sudden vibration woke him. The smooth platform shifted, gently nudging him upright. A soft chime echoed in the room, and the AI's voice returned, as calm and detached as ever. It is time, David Kane. Preparations for the ceremony of unity must begin. David swung his legs over the edge of the platform, his body still aching from whatever transport method had brought him here. He wasn't ready, mentally or physically, but it was clear that readiness didn't matter. With a resigned sigh, he followed the glowing path that appeared on the floor, leading him through a series of corridors that seemed alive, the walls subtly shifting as he passed. The pathway opened into a grand chamber, vast and circular, with a ceiling so high it vanished into shadows. At the center of the room was a pool, its surface glowing softly, rippling with colors that seemed to dance in time with an unseen rhythm. Around the pool stood several figures, their forms tall and slender, their features hidden beneath flowing robes. Their presence was unnerving. They didn't speak, didn't move, yet their attention was palpable. Ashera stood at the edge of the pool, her commanding figure radiating a quiet power. She turned as David entered, her silver eyes locking onto his. "Welcome, Ambassador," she said, her voice echoing softly in the chamber. "This is the Pool of Eternus, the heart of the ceremony." David stopped a few steps away, his gaze shifting uneasily between her and the pool. "I still don't understand what's expected of me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" Ashera's expression remained unreadable. "The ceremony is a binding of essences, a merging of souls. You and I will enter the pool together, and through its power, our intentions, fears, and truths will be laid bare. The pool will judge your worthiness, and by extension, the worthiness of your species." David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. And if the pool doesn't like what it sees? She hesitated, and for the first time, David thought he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her gaze. Then the bond will fail, and the consequences will be dire. He stared at her, disbelief and frustration bubbling to the surface. "You're telling me humanity's entire future depends on whether or not I can pass some alien ritual? I'm not even sure I understand what's at stake." "You are not here by accident, David Kane," she replied, her tone firm. "You were chosen because your spirit holds the potential to bridge the gap between our worlds. But the pool is not just a test of you, it is a test of us both. I too will be judged." David's mind raced. This wasn't just about him. It was about the Queen as well. For reasons he couldn't fully grasp, his fate and hers were now intertwined. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Before he could respond, one of the robed figures stepped forward, holding a small glowing orb. The figure extended it toward David, their movements slow and deliberate. "Take it," Ashera said. "It will prepare you for the ceremony." David reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the orb's surface. The moment he touched it, a wave of warmth spread through his body. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, he saw flashes of memories that weren't his, images of towering alien cities, battles fought in the skies, and a deep, overwhelming loneliness. He gasped and pulled his hand back, the orb's glow fading as the robed figure retreated. "What was that?" he demanded. "A glimpse," Ashera said quietly. "The pool will show you much more." It will lay bare all that you are, and all that you are not. David took a shaky step back, his heart pounding. "This is insane," he muttered. "I didn't ask for this." "No one asks for destiny," Ashera said, her voice softer now. "But it finds us all the same." She turned toward the pool, stepping gracefully into the glowing water. The surface rippled around her, the colors intensifying as she waded deeper. She paused and looked back at him, her expression almost gentle. "Come, David Kane. The ceremony waits." David hesitated, every instinct in his body screaming at him to run, to find a way out of this madness. But something about her gaze, an unspoken plea buried beneath her regal exterior, held him in place. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, his feet touching the water's edge. The moment his skin met the pool, a surge of energy shot through him, pulling him forward. He stumbled, catching himself as the water rose around him, warm and alive, almost as if it were reaching out to him. And then, as the colors around him began to swirl faster, his mind was no longer his own. David's mind spiraled into chaos as the pool took hold of him. He wasn't just standing in water, he was inside something alive, something vast and ancient. His thoughts felt exposed, like pages of an open book being flipped through by an unseen hand. Memories of his childhood, his failures, his dreams, and his fears flashed before him, faster than he could process. But it wasn't just his own life he was seeing. Through the swirling colors of the pool, he glimpsed fragments of Ashera's past. He saw her as a young queen, standing amidst her people in a grand hall made of crystal and light. Her face was proud, but her eyes betrayed doubt. He saw her leading armies into battle against monstrous invaders, the sky above her planet dark with fire. He felt her pain, her losses, her struggle to keep her world united under constant threats. And then, deeper still, he saw something darker. A shadow loomed over her memories, a figure cloaked in darkness with glowing crimson eyes. The sight of it sent a chill through David's entire being. He didn't understand what it was, but he felt its malice, its hunger for destruction. It wasn't just an enemy of Cytherea, it was a threat to the entire galaxy. As the vision faded, David found himself standing in a vast, empty void. The pool was gone, the chamber was gone, everything was gone. He was alone, or so he thought. A figure materialized before him, its form shifting like smoke. It was humanoid, yet not. Its features were a distorted mix of his own and Ashera's, as though the pool had fused them into one being. Its voice echoed in his mind, deep and resonant. "David Kane," it said, "you stand on the edge of destiny. Your soul has been measured, your essence weighed. Now you must decide. Will you embrace the bond or flee from it?" David clenched his fists, anger and fear boiling inside him. "What bond? I don't even understand what's happening. I didn't choose any of this." The figure's gaze burned into him. "Choice is an illusion. The bond exists. It has always existed. Your fate is tied to Ashera's, as hers is to yours. Together, you will either rise or fall." David stepped forward, his frustration turning to defiance. "Why me? Why her? I'm just a diplomat from Earth. I don't have the power to save anyone." The figure tilted its head, as if studying him. "Power is not measured by strength or knowledge. It is measured by will. Do you have the will to stand against the darkness, to face the truth of what you are?" Before David could answer, the void around him began to crack, like glass splintering under pressure. Through the cracks, he saw glimpses of reality. The glowing pool, Ashera standing motionless, her expression strained, as if she too was battling some internal force. The voice spoke one last time, softer now. "The bond must be forged. The future depends on it." The void shattered, and David was thrust back into the pool. His body felt heavy, his mind reeling from the visions. He struggled to stay upright, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. Across from him, Ashera's eyes snapped open, glowing with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "David," she said, her voice trembling. "The pool, it has shown me." "Shown you what?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Her gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. "A shadow, a force that will destroy us all unless we stand united. The ceremony, it is not just about trust. It is a preparation for war." David felt the weight of her words sink in. He had come here thinking this was a political ritual, a test to determine humanity's worthiness. But now it was clear this was something far greater. The pool wasn't just binding them together. It was arming them for a fight they couldn't yet comprehend. Before he could respond, the water around them surged, rising like a wave. The robed figures standing around the chamber began chanting in a language David couldn't understand. The energy in the pool intensified, the colors swirling faster, brighter, until the light was blinding. And then, silence. When David opened his eyes, he was no longer in the pool. He was standing on a rocky plateau beneath a sky filled with stars he didn't recognize. Ashera stood beside him, her regal composure returned, though her expression was grave. "Where are we?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is a memory," she said. "Not mine, not yours, but of the pool itself. It is showing us what is to come." David turned, and his breath caught in his throat. In the distance, an enormous fleet of ships loomed, their designs unlike anything he had ever seen. They hovered in formation, their weapons glowing ominously. And at the center of the fleet was the shadow from his vision, its crimson eyes burning with malice. Ashera stepped closer to him, her voice steady but low. "The pool has chosen us, David. It believes we are the only ones who can stop this." David looked at her, his fear warring with determination. He didn't know how, but he knew she was right. Whatever this shadow was, it was coming. And somehow, he and Ashera had to face it together. David stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the monstrous fleet in the sky. The ships were massive, blotting out the stars with their dark forms. Their design was alien, sharp angles and glowing veins of crimson light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And at the center of it all was the shadow. Its eyes burned like fire, twin beacons of malice that seemed to pierce through space and time, locking onto him. "This is insane," David muttered, his voice barely audible. "What are we supposed to do against that?" Ashera turned to him, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "We must unite. The bond forged in the pool is only the beginning. Our strength lies not in physical power, but in the connection we share." David shook his head, disbelief and frustration swirling within him. "I'm just one person, a diplomat. I don't have the skills, the training. Stop doubting yourself." Ashera's voice cut through his protests, sharp and commanding. "The pool chose you for a reason. It saw something in you that even you cannot see. If we falter now, there will be no future for Earth, for Cytheria, or for any world." David swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy cloak. He wanted to argue, to find a way out of this responsibility, but deep down, he knew there was no escape. The shadow was coming, and it didn't care about his doubts. The memory shifted around them. The sky above the fleet grew darker, the crimson light intensifying. The shadow began to move, spreading its presence like ink spilling across the cosmos. David felt its malice growing, a cold, suffocating presence pressing down on him. Suddenly, the memory shattered, and David was thrust back into the chamber. He stumbled, gasping for air as the glowing pool receded, its energy fading. Ashera was beside him, her breathing heavy, her eyes wide with alarm. "The shadow is closer than I feared," she said, her voice trembling. "It knows we have begun the bond. It will come for us." David stared at her, his mind racing. What does that mean? How can it know? "The shadow is not just a force, it is sentient," Ashera explained. "It feeds on fear, division, and despair. The ceremony was supposed to shield us, to strengthen our connection, but it has also made us visible to it." Before David could respond, a deep rumble echoed through the chamber. The robed figures around them stiffened, their movements suddenly frantic. One of them stepped forward, their voice urgent. "Your Majesty, the palace is under attack." "What?" David's heart sank. "Here, now." Ashera's expression hardened, her regal composure snapping into place. "It seems the shadow has allies. We must move." She turned to the robed figures, issuing commands in their language. The chamber shifted, the glowing walls rippling as an exit formed behind them. Ashera grabbed David's arm, pulling him toward it. "Wait," David protested. "What about the ceremony? Is it finished?" "It is enough for now," she replied. "But we are out of time. If we stay here, we will be destroyed." As they fled through the passageway, the rumbling grew louder. David caught glimpses of the attackers, strange, insect-like creatures with sleek, metallic bodies and glowing red eyes. They moved with terrifying speed, their claws slicing through the palace's defenses like paper. They burst into a grand hall, where a group of Xatherian guards stood in formation. Ashera barked orders, her voice sharp and commanding. The guards raised their weapons, unleashing bursts of light that disintegrated the attackers on contact. David ducked as one of the creatures lunged at him, its claws narrowly missing his head. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding, and then something strange happened. A surge of energy shot through him, instinctive and uncontrollable. His hand shot out, and a beam of light erupted from his palm, striking the creature and sending it flying. He stared at his hand, stunned. What just happened?" Ashera glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "The bond," she said simply. "It has already begun to change you." David didn't have time to process her words. More attackers poured into the hall, their screeches echoing off the walls. The guards fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered. Ashera grabbed a weapon from one of the fallen guards, wielding it with practiced precision. David followed her lead, his newfound abilities flickering to life as he fought to stay alive. The battle was chaotic, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal. David's movements were clumsy at first, but with each attack, he felt the bond growing stronger, guiding him, enhancing his reflexes. He and Ashera moved as one, their actions synchronized in a way that felt both alien and natural. Finally, the last of the attackers fell, their bodies dissolving into ash. The chamber was quiet again, save for the labored breathing of the survivors. David leaned against a pillar, his body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. "We can't stay here," Ashera said, her tone urgent. "The Shadow's forces will keep coming. We must leave the palace and reach the Nexus." David frowned. "The Nexus? What's that?" "It is the core of our world's power," she explained. "If we can reach it, we may be able to strengthen the bond and prepare for what is to come." David nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't fully understand what was happening to him, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back. Whatever this shadow was, whatever the bond meant, he was in this fight now, and he was determined to see it through. The palace was in chaos. Fires burned along its crystalline walls, casting eerie reflections of destruction. The once regal halls were now battlegrounds, littered with the remnants of shattered technology and the bodies of fallen defenders. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the distant cries of retreating survivors. David moved quickly behind Ashera, his every step weighed down by the gravity of the situation. The Queen's composure was unwavering, her sharp commands cutting through the din of destruction. "This way," she said, gesturing toward a concealed passage that shimmered into view as they approached. "The Nexus lies deep beneath the palace. It's our only chance to stabilize the bond." David glanced over his shoulder, the distant screeches of the Shadow's forces growing louder. His heart pounded, but a strange sense of clarity settled over him. Whether it was the bond with Ashera or the adrenaline coursing through his veins, he felt sharper, more focused. "Why the Nexus?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "What can it do?" Ashera glanced at him as they moved, her expression grim. "The Nexus is the heart of Cytheria, a convergence of energy that sustains our world. It will amplify the bond between us, making it strong enough to resist the shadow's influence. Without it, we are vulnerable." David processed her words, the weight of their task pressing down on him. "And if we fail?" Her silence was answer enough. The passageway opened into a cavernous chamber, its walls glowing with veins of luminous blue energy. At its center was the Nexus, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with life, its surface shimmering with a kaleidoscope of colors. The air around it was charged, humming with power that seemed to resonate in David's chest. "It's beautiful," he murmured, momentarily awestruck. Ashera stepped forward, her regal presence commanding even in the face of such overwhelming power. "Do not let its beauty deceive you. The Nexus is as dangerous as it is powerful. It will test us both." David frowned. "Test us? Haven't we been tested enough?" She turned to him, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "The ceremony was just the beginning. To fully unite, we must face the Nexus. It will strip away every barrier, every lie, every fear. Only then will the bond be complete." David hesitated, a knot of apprehension forming in his stomach. He had already seen glimpses of Ashera's past, felt her pain and her strength. What would she see in him? What would the Nexus reveal about his own weaknesses, his own failures? Before he could voice his doubts, a deafening crash echoed through the chamber. The Shadow's forces had found them. Dozens of the insect-like creatures swarmed into the room, their glowing red eyes fixed on the Nexus. Their movements were frenetic, their screeches grating and unnatural. At their center was a larger figure, a hulking monstrosity with armor that gleamed like obsidian and a staff crackling with dark energy. Its presence was suffocating, its crimson eyes locking onto David and Ashera with predatory intent. "The General of Shadows," Ashera said, her voice low. "It commands the Shadow's armies." David's pulse quickened. "Great, so now we're up against their leader." Ashera raised her weapon, her stance unyielding. "The Nexus must be protected at all costs. You must enter it, David. Alone." His eyes widened. "Wait, what? Alone? You said we had to face it together." "I will hold them off," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "The bond is already forming. If you enter the Nexus, it will recognize you as part of me. It is the only way." David wanted to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was no fear, no hesitation, only trust. She believed in him, even if he didn't believe in himself. "Go," she said, turning to face the advancing swarm. "I will not let them pass." Before he could think, David found himself running toward the Nexus. The energy radiating from it was overwhelming, the hum growing louder with each step. He hesitated for a brief moment at its base, glancing back to see Ashera fighting with unmatched ferocity. The General of Shadows loomed over her, its staff crackling with dark power. David clenched his fists. He couldn't fail. Not now, not after everything they had endured. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the Nexus. The world dissolved around him. He was no longer in the cavern, but in a place that defied understanding. Light and darkness swirled together in an infinite void, and a voice, not Ashera's, not his own, spoke directly into his mind. "David Kane, you have entered the Nexus. Your truth will be revealed." Images bombarded him, memories he had buried, fears he had ignored. He saw himself as a child, struggling to fit in, his fear of failure driving him to work harder, always harder. He saw the guilt he carried from decisions he had made as a diplomat, lives lost because he couldn't find the right words at the right time. He felt the crushing weight of his own insecurities, the belief that he wasn't good enough, that he was an imposter pretending to be a hero. "No," he shouted, his voice echoing in the void. "I'm not that man anymore. I'm more than my failures." The voice responded, calm yet firm. You are what you choose to be. Will you embrace the bond and the responsibility it demands? David's thoughts turned to HFY, to the trust she had placed in him despite knowing his flaws. He thought of Earth, of the people who would never know how close they had come to destruction. And he thought of the shadow, the malevolent force that threatened everything he cared about. I will, he said, his voice steady. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'll do whatever it takes. The light around him flared, and suddenly he felt the bond solidify. It was as if a piece of HFY's strength had merged with his own, filling the voids where doubt had lingered. He wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone. The void collapsed, and David found himself back in the cavern. The nexus pulsed brighter than before, its energy radiating outward. HFY was still fighting, her movements slower, her strength waning. The General of Shadows raised its staff for a killing blow. No, David shouted, extending his hand. The nexus responded, its energy flowing through him like a river. A beam of light shot from his palm, striking the general and sending it crashing into the far wall. HFY turned to him, her expression a mix of relief and awe. You did it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded, his resolve unshakable. We did it. But the shadow wasn't done yet. Its forces regrouped, their numbers growing. The battle was far from over. David barely had time to catch his breath as the swarm surged forward again, their glowing red eyes and jagged limbs reflecting the Nexus's pulsing light. The General of Shadows, though battered, rose from the wreckage, its obsidian armor cracked but not broken. Its crimson eyes locked onto David with a new intensity, a mix of rage and perhaps caution. HFY, David called, stepping forward, his hands still tingling with the energy of the Nexus. We need a plan. These things won't stop. She nodded, her exhaustion evident, but her resolve unshaken. The Nexus has empowered you, but it is also a beacon. The shadow will not stop until it consumes this place, and us with it. David looked at the Nexus, its crystalline form humming with raw power. He could feel its energy coursing through him, but it was volatile, like holding a storm in his hands. What if we use it against them? HFY's gaze sharpened. The Nexus is not a weapon. Its energy sustains my world. If it is destroyed, Cytheria will die. I'm not saying we destroy it, David said quickly, his mind racing. But what if we redirect its power? Use it to seal this place off. Trap the shadow's forces here. Her eyes widened as realization dawned. A containment field. It's possible, but it would require both of us. The bond must be fully engaged, and even then the process will be dangerous. The energy could destroy us. David glanced at the advancing swarm, their screeches growing louder as they closed in. He clenched his fists, the energy within him flaring instinctively. If we don't try, they'll destroy everything anyway. We don't have a choice. HFY hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Very well, but you must follow my lead. The Nexus will respond to us as one, or not at all. They moved to the base of the Nexus, the crystal structure towering above them, its surface shimmering with chaotic patterns. HFY placed her hands on the Nexus, her expression one of deep concentration. David mimicked her movements, and the moment his palms touched the surface, a surge of energy nearly knocked him off his feet. The connection was instantaneous. He felt the bond between them solidify, their thoughts and emotions intertwining. For a brief moment, he could feel everything HFY had endured, her loneliness as a ruler, her burden of protecting a world constantly under siege, and her unwavering hope that this alliance with humanity could change everything. In return, she felt his fears, his doubts, and the hidden strength he had yet to fully recognize. Focus, HFY said, her voice echoing in his mind. We must channel the energy together. The Nexus responded to their unity, its light intensifying until the entire chamber was bathed in radiant energy. The Shadow's forces hesitated, their movements faltering as if sensing the power being unleashed. Even the General of Shadows seemed momentarily wary, its crimson eyes narrowing. But the reprieve was short-lived. The General raised its staff, unleashing a wave of dark energy that crashed against the Nexus's light. The entire chamber shook, cracks forming in the walls as the opposing forces clashed. "Ashera," David shouted, the strain of holding the Nexus's energy beginning to take its toll. "We need to hurry." She didn't respond verbally, but he felt her resolve strengthen through the bond. Together, they focused their energy, directing the Nexus's power outward. The crystal began to vibrate, its hum growing into a deafening roar as a shimmering barrier of light spread outward, pushing back the Shadow's forces. The swarm screeched in agony as the light engulfed them, their forms disintegrating into ash. The General of Shadows roared, its dark energy lashing out in desperation, but the barrier held firm. The room filled with blinding light as the Nexus unleashed its full power, the energy cascading outward like a tidal wave. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the light began to fade, revealing the chamber once more. The Shadow's forces were gone, their forms erased by the Nexus' power. The General of Shadows lay crumpled against the far wall, its obsidian armor shattered. It tried to rise, but the barrier pulsed again, forcing it down. "It's contained," Ashera said, her voice weary but triumphant. "The Nexus has sealed this place. The Shadow cannot escape." David staggered, his body trembling from the effort. "We did it," he said, barely believing the words. "We actually did it." But Ashera's expression remained somber. "For now. The Shadow is weakened, but not destroyed. Its essence lingers, waiting for another opportunity. We must prepare for the next battle." David nodded, his exhaustion replaced by a newfound determination. "Then we'll be ready. Together." Ashera looked at him, a hint of a smile breaking through her usually stoic demeanor. Together. The chamber grew quiet, the Nexus's light dimming to a gentle glow. David felt the bond between him and Ashera stronger than ever. A connection forged not just by circumstance, but by trust and shared purpose. But even as they stood victorious, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Shadow had been contained, but its presence loomed in the back of his mind, a reminder that their fight was far from over. For the first time in his life, though he felt ready, he wasn't just David Kane, the reluctant diplomat from Earth. He was something more. And with Ashera by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. The Nexus chamber was eerily quiet now, the silence broken only by the faint hum of its crystalline core. David and Ashera stood at its base, their breaths heavy, their bodies trembling from the effort of sealing away the Shadow's forces. The battle was over, for now, but the weight of what had just occurred lingered in the air. Ashera turned to David, her silver eyes searching his face. "You've done more than anyone could have asked, David Kane. The bond between us, it is stronger than I ever imagined. But this victory, though significant, is incomplete." David wiped the sweat from his brow, his hands still tingling with residual energy from the Nexus. "The Shadow's forces are gone, and the General is contained. Isn't that enough for now?" Her gaze hardened, though not unkindly. "The General of Shadows is no ordinary enemy. Its defeat here will not stop it from reaching across the void. It will find new ways to spread its corruption. And the Shadow itself, it is not just a foe. It is a force of nature, relentless and unyielding. We cannot afford to rest." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wanted to argue, to demand a moment to breathe, but deep down, he knew she was right. The Shadow's defeat here was just a reprieve, not an ending. And the bond they shared, it was both a weapon and a responsibility. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low. Ashera stepped closer, her regal composure softening. "We prepare. The Nexus has given us a chance to unite our worlds, to rally others against the shadow's advance. But it will require sacrifice, David. The bond between us is permanent, and its effects will only grow stronger. Are you ready to embrace what that means? David hesitated, her words sinking in. The bond had already changed him in ways he didn't fully understand. He could feel Ashera's presence in his mind, her thoughts brushing against his own like whispers in the wind. It was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder that his life would never be the same. But then he thought of Earth, the people he loved, the future they deserved. He thought of Ashera's people, their resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And he thought of the shadow, its crimson eyes burning in his memory. I don't think anyone's ever ready for something like this, he said finally. But I'll do whatever it takes. Ashera inclined her head, a faint smile touching her lips. Then we moved forward together. Before they could say more, the Nexus pulsed again, its light flickering as if responding to their resolve. A deep, resonant tone echoed through the chamber, and the air grew thick with energy. David tensed, his instincts warning him of something new. Ashera, he said, glancing at her. She frowned, her gaze fixed on the Nexus. It is sending a signal. A signal? To who? David asked, his unease growing. Before she could answer, the room shifted. The crystalline walls shimmered, and a massive holographic display emerged, filling the chamber with a map of the galaxy. Points of light blinked across the projection, each one representing a world, a civilization. At the map's center was Xetheria, its glowing core now connected to several other points by faint lines of energy. David's eyes widened. What is this? The Nexus, Ashera said, her voice tinged with awe. It's reaching out to other worlds, calling for aid. The bond we forged has activated its latent power, creating a network of unity. David stared at the map, his heart racing. So, this is how we fight back. By bringing other worlds into the fold. Yes, Ashera said, her tone firm. But it will not be easy. Many of these worlds will be hesitant, divided by fear or distrust. It will take time to build alliances strong enough to stand against the shadow. David exhaled slowly, the enormity of their task sinking in. And the shadow? What if it senses what we're doing? It will, she said simply. And it will try to stop us. A sudden tremor shook the chamber, and the holographic map flickered. David instinctively moved closer to Ashera, his pulse quickening. What now? Ashera closed her eyes, focusing. The general. It's trying to break free. David turned toward the far end of the chamber, where the general of shadows was contained within a shimmering field of light. Its obsidian form was writhing, its dark energy lashing out like tendrils, seeking cracks in its prison. Its crimson eyes blazed with fury, locking onto David and Ashera. We don't have time for this, David muttered, his fists clenching. Ashera stepped forward, her voice steady. We don't need time. We need resolve. She extended her hand, and the bond between them surged. David felt the energy of the Nexus flow through him once more, brighter and more focused than before. Together, they directed the energy toward the general's prison, reinforcing the barrier and driving back its relentless assault. The general roared, its voice a guttural blend of rage and despair. For a brief moment, David thought he saw something behind its crimson eyes. Fear. The realization struck him like a lightning bolt. It's afraid, he said, his voice filled with a mix of shock and determination. It knows we're stronger together. Ashera nodded, her expression resolute. Then let it fear us. With a final surge of energy, the barrier solidified, locking the general in place. The Nexus's light dimmed, its energy stabilizing once more. The tremors ceased, and the chamber fell into an uneasy calm. David turned to Ashera, his chest heaving. We did it. Again. She smiled faintly, exhaustion evident in her features. For now. As the holographic map reappeared, its points of light growing brighter, David felt a strange sense of hope. The road ahead would be long and perilous, But for the first time, he believed they had a chance. Together, they were stronger than the shadow could ever anticipate. And they would not stop until the galaxy was united against it.